Welcome back to How Hard Could It Be, the show where we explore the question that overconfident software developers have been asking themselves for generations. Today, we are looking at a post from Tim Kellogg on Bluesky where he says we should have a tool like NotebookLM that writes a blog post for an academic paper. Yes, every paper should have a blog post, and if it doesn't, I'll just generate it. Well, I read this earlier today, and it got me asking the question, how hard could it be? So with that, let's find out. All right, so before we get started, we're just going to set this timer up here. We're going to call this paper to blog post. And we're going to go ahead and hit start. So that'll just sit up there. And I want to take the first few minutes just to kind of plan out what we're going to need. So what I'm thinking is basically a file upload box, a couple more settings about what style they want this in. And maybe even a future feature could be like provide inspiration links. So like if you don't know what blog post you want, what style you want directly, you could say, hey, here are 2 or 3 blog posts that I like, and it will do that style for us. But let's keep this simple for now. We're just going to have like a file upload and a blog post style, like 2 inputs there. Then we're going to have this workflow that converts after the PDF is converted to text. We'll do the initial draft, the editor step, and the final evaluator. And then we'll leave future features here. So kind of how I'm thinking about this in Retool specifically is that all of these pieces here will be kind of a front-end Retool UI. We'll have this back-end workflow that's running. And then at the very end, we will want to return, the finished blog post to the UI. So finished blog post there. So basically, like we'll kind of go through these 3 steps here, 1 to 1 and 1 to 1. So I think we'll work the same way. Basically, we'll put the UI together real quick. We'll work on doing our workflow and getting that hooked up, and then we'll kind of run through and see the finished blog post. Let's go ahead and get going. So I've also got over here just our basic like Retool canvas. So we'll call this paper to blog post. Description folder, we'll leave all that blank for now because we just want to go ahead and get started building. I'm going to grab a block of text here, drag it over the screen, and we can write some markdown in here. So we're going to give this a title. We also now need our file upload component. So let's go ahead and do the drop zone. I like the drop zone personally just because it's pretty helpful. So let's say that can stay as it is for now. We don't necessarily want to put that to Retool storage, so we'll leave that off for now. The next thing we need is an input. Let's give it a drop down about what sort of blog post style we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to jump over to Claude and ask it for some help brainstorming what these could be here. All right, so now that we're in Claude, we're just going to ask it for some ideas for categories of blog posts. Can you brainstorm a list of 10 ideas for categories? I don't think we'll end up using all 10. We probably want maybe 4 or 5. But what we really want is to get a good kind of 4 or 5 and then really well-written descriptions for each of those. So I think probably academic/educational, narrative, analytical, and maybe journalistic could be the 4 that we use here. So let's focus on 2, 3, 4, and 9. Okay, so if we narrow down the list to that, cool. So it tells us a little bit more about what it means now that we've narrowed down that list. And this will be super helpful later once we actually start putting these into the workflow and trying to generate them. So we'll leave this here for now. We'll jump back over to our app editor and we'll say, cool. So we need to put these labels in here. We're just going to say academic/educational. Actually, we need that in the label and we'll give the value academic. Cool. So we've got all 4 of those now, and then we will just fix our placeholder. We'll give it a default value of academic, just so there's something selected in the list when it opens up. And we're also going to call this blog post style. And then we need to give it a label. So we'll click into our label here and we'll say, what style should the post be written in, right? Cool. So we've got that, and yeah, that looks pretty good. So this is very basic for now, but it's looking all right so far. If we go and we give it a button, we can say, great, we want to, submit this. Instead of button, we'll just say generate blog post. Cool. All right, so now that we've got all these things happening, what we really want to do in the background is when someone drops a PDF onto this upload drag and drop, we really want it to convert the document to text in the background. So let's go ahead and hook that up. We're going to click the plus button to get a new query here. We're going to select an AI action. And we're going to call this query just parse PDF, Retool AI. For the action, we're going to choose convert document to text. For our file source, we're going to select our PDF upload. That's why it's nice to name our file drop zone so that we can refer to it easily. And we're going to hit save on that for now. Let's go find an interesting academic paper to test this out on. Maybe look at a large language model paper and see what looks interesting here. Are your LLMs capable of stable reasoning? Okay, cool. That seems kind of interesting. So we can just grab the PDF. And now that we have that, we're just going to go ahead and pull it into our downloads. Cool, so that's there. We now have a paper that works well. This is quite long, so we'll see how we do with the context window there. But we do have a paper that is working. So now we can jump back over here and we can actually just test what happens here. So we're going to just create a very temporary component that is just a text component. And all we want this to do is be the output of our parse PDF query. So all we want this to say is when the PDF gets parsed, we just want to see what text shows up here. So next thing we need to do is in the event handlers, we want to say whenever the document is parsed, we want to trigger the parse PDF query so it knows that it needs to parse that data. And once that is set up, I think we should be good to go. Let's try this out. If we go to our downloads folder, LLM paper, we upload it. We see in the bottom here, our parse PDF query is running. And we also see in our text box, we get the spinner because it's waiting for the results of that query to run. So it does take a little bit of time. And while we're working on this, we probably want to put a loading spinner on this button. So first of all, let's name it. And second of all, we want to make it so that this button shows the loading spinner if the PDF parse query is running. So we can do that by saying parse PDF is fetching. And essentially what that will do is whenever that PDF query is running, there will be a loading spinner on that button as well. So because this text isn't going to be here forever, we want some indication to the user that we're working on the thing you asked us for, but we're not quite ready yet. So it looks like this query didn't quite run how we expected. Let's see what happened here. Okay, so we did get it, but for some reason, we just need data 0 here. Perfect. Okay, awesome. So, right, so now we have the full text of our PDF paper as, actual text as opposed to a PDF file, which is pretty helpful, and that's what we're going to actually pass to our large language model. So great, so now that we know that's working, we have our style selected here, and we have our generate blog post. So that's our button, and that's what we're going to need to hook up next. But before we do that, we're actually going to need to create a workflow to receive that input essentially. So let's go ahead and do that. I've got a blank workflow here. We're going to go ahead and delete this code block that it gave us to start. And we're going to call this paper to blog post as well. And just to kind of test this out, we're going to have a style parameter, which we'll say is academic. We will have some blog post text. Actually, this is not blog post text. This is paper text, lorem ipsum. And those are the two things that we will have as inputs here. So the way we can do that is just kind of create a new workflow block. We're going to do another AI action. I'm going to switch the model here to Claude just because I like that for writing. And actually what I'm going to do is also use Claude's console to help me generate a prompt here. So let's take a look at how that works. All right, so over here in the Claude console, I can click on this button, Generate a Prompt, which will allow me to basically describe what I want to do and get a good starting point for a prompt. So I want to take an academic paper and transform it into a blog post in a given style. So that's a pretty generic sort of prompt, but you can see that once I click on this and let it work a little bit, it will actually, write me a much better prompt that, will give me sort of the output that I want. So what we can do is just take this and pull this back over into Retool. And we'll use that here as our prompt. You'll notice it has this double curly brace syntax, which is exactly the same syntax you can use in Retool, but we just need to update this a little bit to have our actual data in there. So we'll say that the academic paper is paper text, and the blog style, we will say this is starttrigger.data.blog, style. Right, so this says academic. So we also want to give it a little more information about the styles, right? So this is where we can go over here, copy the information that we got from our styles earlier, and then take that back into our workflow. As far as the possible styles, here's some more information about what categorizes each style. So we'll put this in a XML tag, and this just kind of helps the prompt figure out what is your prompt and what is information that it should be specifically looking for. So we have our 4 styles in here now, so it will know a little bit about each one. And let's just see what that looks like. So with paper text of lorem ipsum, we probably won't get a very good output here. We're not giving it much to work with, but let's just see what it comes up with here. Basically, so it's calling us out here and saying, hey, we don't have enough data to help with this. So let's actually spend a little bit of time hooking this up. So to connect a workflow to a Retool app, we need to go over here to triggers, and we need to set up a webhook. So this webhook basically allows you to call this workflow either via some sort of code base or API calling tool, but it also allows us to call it from a Retool app. And we're also going to put a webhook return step here. This is, basically the final step that if you call it via webhook, you need to tell it what you want it to return. And so we're just going to say, write first draft.data. So this means that in the app, we'll be able to actually get the contents of the blog post as well. So going to go ahead and hit deploy on that for now. What we should be able to do, trigger this from the app, give it the text, get a first draft, and get that data back in the app. So let's hook that last piece up. So back over here, we can get rid of this text for now. And the generate blog post here, we're going to create a query that triggers a workflow. And so the workflow that we want is paper to blog post. And we're going to give it raw parameters. So style was what we gave it. And we're going to say, what did we call this input? Blog post style.data. Dot value. Perfect. And then we're also going to give it paper text, and then we will give that as our results of our query, right? So our parsed PDF.data. And then remember, we had to, because the parses it as an array, we had to give it that 0 as well. One last thing we'll want to probably do is make sure this generate button is disabled if there is no data in the parse PDF query, right? So if we haven't uploaded a PDF yet, we obviously don't want people to be able to click this button, because that would send an empty data set to our workflow, which is not what we want. So, okay, cool. Let's try this again. Let's drag and drop here. Let's grab our paper. Cool, and you see we've got our nice little loading spinner now, which is perfect. Our parse PDF query runs and gives us our data back, which is very cool. And now the last thing we need to do here is hook this generate button up to our workflow. So we want to control a query, our send to workflow query, and we want to trigger it. So let's do that and see what happens. our send to workflow query, you can see down here is running. What we can do here then is, in a similar way as we had our text output before, we can just grab our little text box here and we can say send to workflow dot data dot blog post. And so this actually gives us, the output. Let's move it down here and also expand it a little bit. This gives us, the blog post output of the blog post that was actually generated, which is pretty cool. So what we can do is, let's see if we go ahead and pick a different style. Let's maybe do narrative and see what that looks like. Cool. And you can see now it's actually changed our headline to something that's more narrative. We got mystery of the fluctuating genius, the great experiment. So this is definitely in a much more narrative style. If we ask for journalistic, we could see the same thing. Let's try that. New study reveals major stability. This definitely sounds more like a newspaper headline. So it's absolutely respecting our style at this point, which is pretty awesome. Unfortunately, these blog post tags are still in here. So let's jump back over to our workflow and sort that out a little bit. So back over here in the workflow, we want to just hold off on this return step for now. We definitely want to keep the blog post in our blog post tags, but let's have an editor step. So we're going to do another AI action. We're going to call this edit first draft. All right, so back over in the Claude console, we're going to generate another prompt. I want to edit a given blog post based on an academic paper. Okay, so let's see what it comes up with here. All right, so it tells us about the expert editor. It wants the text of the paper again. It wants the text of the blog post again. And it wants our writing style. So it's a pretty good editor prompt. Let's bring this over into our workflow. All right, so we're going to flip the model to Claude again, just because this is another sort of language task. So here, same thing. It wants the text of our paper, so we can give it from our start trigger. We can give it our paper text. Next, it wants the blog post. So we go up here. This is our write first draft block. So we want write first draft dot data. That'll give the whole thing. Actually, because that already includes the blog post tags, we can take those off of the prompt here. Let's do that. And then the writing style, let's just copy this start trigger.data.style for sure. But let's copy this style information as well so that it's consistent across that. So we'll just give it there. And yeah, very cool. So now we have an edit first draft. And now instead of returning what's coming from the write first draft block, we want what's coming from the edit first draft block. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and hit deploy. Let's see, kind of what the difference is here with this. So I'm going to go back to academic and I'm going to hit generate. So because we now have 2 AI steps in place, this definitely does take a little bit longer. While we're doing that, go up here to our loading query, and we want to make this button spin while it's generating the blog post as well. So we'll do the same thing. We'll say if our send to workflow query is fetching, we want that spinner to be visible as well. Cool. So this, it looks like it did a little bit different of a headline, the abstract, the introduction. This is very academic for sure. Let's go back and try the narrative style again, just to see what that looks like, just because I think that'll be a little more interesting. All right, so this is, our narrative style again. So it's back to, a tale of two minds. That's definitely a less sort of academic headline. It looks like it pulls some facts here from the paper. So you definitely want to check those to make sure it wasn't hallucinating. But it does look like this is pretty well written. Let's see what it did in the editing notes. So it added specific performance metrics from the paper. That's pretty cool. So apparently that wasn't in the first draft, but it looked and noticed that it should do that. It corrected the representation. It did some things to the narrative style. It updated the structure and flow, and it labeled the technical precision as well. So that's pretty good. And that's a good first draft here. So looking back at kind of our workflow, we've got the initial draft, we've got the editor step. Let's do one more check specifically to double check any facts and figures that it included. expand maybe the blog post a little bit to make it a little bit longer, and just kind of put that final polish on it. Let's do that real quick. So we're going to go over here. Once again, we're going to disconnect this return blog post step. We'll save that for a little bit later. And we're going to chain another AI action here. We'll call this final polish. And if we jump back over to the Anthropic console, we will say, I want an editor. Based on it should check all passengers. Make a few suggestions so post can be edited, and that might default post size. Also, so let's see what we do with that. We've already kind of used our first editor for the voice and tone, so we're not mentioning anything about the style here. We really just want this to be, a solid fact check, and then, go through and write the final post. So I think we can use this mostly as is. Let's jump back over here. Obviously, we have to fill in our actual data. And the draft blog post is going to be coming from our edit first draft step. So you can kind of see how these build on each other. It's going to do our fact checking, and it's going to publish it inside final blog post tags. So hopefully this will give us, a good version of a final post. Let's hook up our return again. And now we're going to do final polish.data. We're going to deploy our workflow. If you're hitting your workflow via a webhook, you want to make sure that any changes you do make, you deploy, just because when you hit it via API, it will be using the latest deployed version. Let's bounce back over to our app now. And we're going to do the same thing. Let's do it in narrative style. Let's go ahead and click generate. Once you get a version of this workflow running, a good kind of experiment to run is to see whether some of these steps could be swapped out with a faster model. So if you want to use Haiku for a more basic task or something like that, or you want to use 4o Mini or any of these OpenAI models as well, this is a good place to maybe start experimenting with models once you have a workflow and kind of a process that's working. So here we go. Here's where it's doing its fact check. And then it actually did write the final blog post. And let's see if it incorporated some of the expansion suggestions. So highlighting gaps and possible future research avenues can engage the academic audience. So it does say, we kind of have a roadmap for future exploration, etc. That's pretty good. So I think that is pretty solid. The only thing I would be interested in trying is maybe splitting this last piece into a final step. So what I've noticed is Claude in particular seems to be limiting the length of the response based on how much is in there. So because we have the expansion suggestions and the final blog post, it looks like our blog post is a little bit shorter than we want it to be. So using the following suggestions and the draft blog post, size, and post. So today, post drafts is going to be it's not actually making as zero rushing bullet post draft. And suggestions is going to be the final final step. And let's see. We're looking at these suggestions, write the final blog post, incorporate, we include it in the final blog post tag, aim for a length of, let's just say 1,500 words. Because of how the large language models work, it can't hit a specific word count for you, but we do want to just have that aim there. And we'll flip this over to Sonnet as well. Cool, so let's see, let's hook up our webhook response here, just so that's connected. And we want this to be write final post.data. Let's run it. Okay, there we go. So we have a generated post here, the final blog post, Unstable Genius, the story of AI's mathematical mind. So this is really interesting. It incorporates a bunch of stuff that we've actually seen in the paper. And it works. It's got some headings. It's got, bulleted lists. It's got a conclusion. Yeah, cool. And it has even a note here at the bottom that says this is based on, an actual research paper. So pretty cool. The one thing that I want to do right now is get these final blog post tags out of here. I want this to be something that theoretically we could just copy and paste into, an editor and keep going on our own. So let's go back over to our workflow, and we're just going to add one final step here. In this case, we are going to add a code step. So this code step here, we're just going to call parse tags, and we're going to jump back over to our trusty friend Claude. We're going to ask it for a new chat, and we're going to say So this is regex is something that I'm not super comfortable with. I can kind of read it and understand it, but I don't exactly know how to write it from scratch all the time. So let's try this, and we're going to go to our workflow. And yep, absolutely. So here are, instead of text, we want this to be write final post dot data. So it pulls that there, and then it matches, and then we're just going to return the contents. So this should just grab everything between those final blog post tags. It should get rid of all the XML tags. This will also take care of if Claude decides to output a bunch of explanation or anything else about like why it wrote what it wrote, it will get rid of that as well and just give us the final blog post back. So if we hook up our return blog post webhook, we should be able to deploy this and go back to our Retool workflow, hit generate blog post. This is the point where we cross our fingers for sure. We've got so many spinners. Spinners on spinners. All right, there we go. So that ran. We've got, the unstable genius here. It looks like we've still got our final blog post tags for some reason. No, that is not what we wanted. So let's figure out what's going on there. If we go back to our latest workflow run, this is where it's really helpful to be able to step through piece by piece. So we can write final blog post. We see we have our tag here. Oh, I see what happened. Okay, let's fix that. If we look here in our webhook block, you can see we're returning write final post dot data. So it's returning the output of this block and skipping over parse tags entirely. So really what we want to be doing is returning parse tags dot data. And that should hopefully give us what we want. Let's go back over to our app and run it again. We just lost it completely. That is not what you want. Okay, let's figure out what's going on there. So let's figure out what is going on there. This one ran write final post. It absolutely did. Our parse tag step, returned our data as an array. Okay, so we need to get the first item in the array. Actually, what we can do, let's make this a little cleaner. Instead of returning this, we're just going to return contents 0 here. If you think there's a chance that this might not work because final blog post is going to be an empty tag, this is the place where you would want to put some sort of error handling to check that our contents array wasn't empty. But for now, let's just do that because that will let us get going with this. So let's go ahead and generate again. But this is an example of why being able to jump into these individual steps is super helpful. You can see kind of the output at each of the steps. And so we could just easily go through and debug like, okay, at write final post, this was looking good. But then by the time we get to parse tags, this is not the output that we would expect. All right. And that is how it's done. That is, exactly what we were hoping for. And we see that we now have, a generated blog post. We don't have any of our final blog post tags anymore. We just have our headline, we have our content, and we have, this pulled from the academic paper. We have it edited for style. We have it fact checked, and it is ready to go. So we can see here that, it does have this nice little research note at the bottom, which is nice. So if you want to go look up the primary source, you can absolutely do that. That's something that you could modify the prompt to ask for as well. But in our case, Claude just did it naturally. So that's it. Let's go ahead and stop the clock here. 49 minutes, 24 seconds. We have a first version of a NotebookLM-style academic paper to blog post engine built entirely in Retool. This is the kind of thing where you could build this and deploy it internally. You could build it and deploy it as a public app. If you wanted to build a website front end for this, you could use their workflow as just the back end and call it, via the API endpoint that we looked at earlier. So there are a lot of possibilities and ways to expand this. And hopefully this has sparked some ideas for you. So if you have another idea for an app that you want to see me build, please let me know. You know me, I'm always asking the question, how hard could it be? I'll see you next time.